Good evening and welcome to our President's Day edition of RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is a very special President's Day, the last one for our current president as Obama winds down his second term. And it also falls just after that pivotal New Hampshire primary, which helps pick the next president. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, as you know, coming away major winners this year. But that doesn't mean they ought to start measuring the drapes in the White House. We will talk to a historian about the history of New Hampshire and how unpredictable it has proven to be. Then we will take a look at Lincoln's only visit to Westchester County. Stopping there, he spoke and he traveled to Washington for his inauguration, I should say. Then an extended look at the life and the legacy of the man who spent more time in the White House than any other. Of course, I'm talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But we start with New Hampshire and people battling each other to become our next commander-in-chief. And joining us now, a favorite of the program, Dr. Yannick Mieczkowski, professor of history at Dowling College. Doctor, thank you as always. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich.
All right, with New Hampshire and obviously before that, Iowa in our rearview mirror, there are certain unescapable realities that it's been a long time, maybe ever since we have to grapple with, which two outsiders, relatively speaking, Trump on the Republican side and obviously Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side, that are no longer just factors, but at this point, especially coming off their historic wins in New Hampshire, if not frontrunners, certainly folks that will dictate in many ways how this race goes. Have we ever seen anything like it? Two relative outsiders, two people who nobody would have picked in Vegas over/under on even 3-6 months ago, commanding this amount of the national dialogue and driving in many ways the terms of the election.
This is a truly unprecedented race in this respect. This race has confounded a lot of the pundits and experts. I was on your show last summer and I predicted that the Trump phenomenon was just a flirtation and people would get tired of it. Yeah, everybody did. So this will go down no matter how it ends up as a historic race. I think Bernie Sanders answers to a couple of impulses that are very current right now. The authenticity issue. The guy is just so genuine. No matter how you feel about his politics, he comes across as very real and approachable and authentic. And he also speaks to the growing concern about inequality that people have been concerned about really since the 1980s. Graphs show that income equality continues to increase and get exacerbated, and he speaks about that. He speaks about Wall Street and banks, these monoliths that are your enemy, and people are attracted to that. And then Donald Trump answers questions about America, fading America. He promises to use his wealth and prestige and influence and business know-how to keep America winning. And that's something attractive. There's something attractive about that to Americans.
We've seen from the Wallaces or the Goldwaters hints of this, not the same thing obviously, but we've seen loud voices before, but usually it's Iowa or New Hampshire, and quickly you don't see any path for them going forward. We don't know how this ends, but arguably with so many of the establishment candidates still in this, dividing up that portion of the electorate, he's going to be in this for a while, and that is different than we've seen in history, right?
Right. He has momentum, the big mo, as George Bush Sr. used to call it. And there's a kind of economic populism to Donald Trump almost, in that he openly admits that he's greedy, but he says he wants to be greedy for Americans. And again, there's something appealing about that to many Americans who feel that they've been left out, that the deck is stacked against them in terms of income inequality, and also that he'll be tough in foreign policy. In a decade still after 9/11 and with the rise of ISIS, Americans are very concerned about terrorism, and Trump, in very memorable language, has promised that he would beat ISIS and make America great again.
You know, from a historical perspective, it's funny, almost a sidebar to this. For the Democrats, as currently constituted, certainly, you're either going to have your first female nominee for president, also your first Jewish potentially candidate for president. And on the Republican side, you have two Latinos that right now are at least in the conversation, and one polling very well. It's funny, 8 years ago, we were fixated certainly on the race issue and also on the gender issue with Hillary as the primaries was just getting underway. But nonetheless, it's a very good chance we'll make history again this year.
Yeah, this might be part of an evolutionary process in opening up the presidency to different groups. It wasn't too long ago in 1960 when John F. Kennedy was a Catholic nominee for president that there was a lot of talk that he'd be under the Pope's thumb, and let alone earlier in 1928 when Al Smith was the Democratic nominee. People said the Lincoln Tunnel was being built at that time. People suspected that he was, as a New Yorker, was trying to use the Lincoln Tunnel as a way to communicate with the Pope. I mean, ridiculous ideas, but this is how it is. Now we won't bat an eyelash at a Catholic nominee. Now, after Barack Obama, we won't think twice about an African-American nominee. So it may very well be that, for example, somebody from a business background will be readily accepted. We've already had George W. Bush, the first NBA president, and then Mitt Romney with a business background. We might in another generation accept a businessman nominee, a female nominee, a Jewish,
or sooner than that.
Or a Hispanic nominee as president.
Now, certainly coming off of Iowa, we thought that Marco Rubio was a surprising second place finish there. He may position himself, a third place finish there. He may position himself for a big New Hampshire. Then he had that horrible flub at the debate where he kept repeating lines. And many people thought that was a huge turn, not just in the returns for New Hampshire, but potentially going forward here, not ready for prime time. We obviously remember what happened to Governor Perry, where he couldn't name certain departments in the actual government. But that said, there's been other even bigger faux pas or bigger foot in the mouths in other campaigns that have really driven it, to whether it be tears or snowflakes, depending on your perspective, for Ed Muskie in Maine. But there's been more, right?
Right. In 1988, George H.W. Bush was the prohibitive favorite. He was the sitting vice president, and he lost in New Hampshire. He lost to Bob Dole and Pat Robertson. But going into New Hampshire, he had television ads that portrayed Bob Dole, the Senate Majority Leader, as a flip-flopper. And Bob Dole could possibly have won New Hampshire, except in a live television interview, he said about George H.W. Bush, "Stop lying about my record." And the problem with that is it confirmed some fears about Bob Dole, that he was hot-tempered, that he would fly off the handle, that he perhaps wasn't somebody to trust with his finger on the nuclear button. And that really helped to sink Bob Dole's campaign in 1988.
Now, before people start writing epitaphs and also crowning victors here after New Hampshire, it hasn't always been predictive of how things go, right?
Right. Well, as recently as 2000, John McCain won New Hampshire, yet George W. Bush came back with a very strong performance in South Carolina, went on to win not only the nomination, but the presidency. So New Hampshire isn't always an accurate predictor. In 1992, Bill Clinton lost in Iowa to Tom Harkin, the governor of Iowa, and then lost in New Hampshire to Senator Paul Tsongas of nearby Massachusetts. But Bill Clinton did something very clever that still ranks as one of the biggest sound bites coming out of New Hampshire. He declared himself the comeback kid in New Hampshire, and that helped focus a lot of attention on him, and from there the path was pretty smooth for him to the nomination.
If there's other historical either parallels or lines you're going to watch in this election more than the obvious, which is who's going to win, and some of the coattails obviously for a lot of for the House and for a lot of Senate seats up as well, what else are you going to be looking for between now and November?
Well, I definitely wouldn't count somebody like Mark Rubio out because he has such a compelling background story. He speaks to the demographics that the Republicans want to draw in. And his background story of being the son of Cuban immigrants is very appealing, from the lower middle class, his father a bartender, his mother a domestic servant, a maid. And he also projects a tone of hope and optimism, and Americans like to see that in their leaders. They're drawn to hope and optimism. It was one reason that Ronald Reagan was so attractive to many voters.
Two words you said today, I think it'll be interesting. Authenticity, people like it, and then when you give that away, it's hard to ever earn it back, and also optimism. Even with the silly hats of Make America Great, it's resonating somehow with somewhere. So we'll keep an eye on both of these. Yannick, as always, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for having me, Rich.
All right, coming up next, everybody, both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, they're trying to carry the progressive mantle all the way to the White House. We will take a look back at that movement and some of the huge names that rode it all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.